Afternoon. So I've just watched a video by one of my colleagues from FM, and she did it and named it her pregnancy icks. So it's given me an idea to do a video called My Life Icks, because my MS is obviously pretty shit. So I just thought, do you know what? Yeah, let's go for it. So number one, on creation, this is my dog, by the way. She's just deciding to get in on act. Yeah, thanks, Holly. That's really lovely. On creation of me, God decided that I was okay to be born into grief. So yeah, my youngest of my two older brothers died the year before I was born. So yeah, my mum and dad were really happy when I arrived. But to be fair, my mum was really, really happy because she had always wanted a girl. And as she says, I am her special baby, which I absolutely hate. But that's another story. So, number one, being born into grief. It's shit. I remember being about 4 or 5 years old, crying my eyes out, asking God why he let Jonathan die. Sorry, not Jonathan, Matthew. Jonathan was my older of my two brothers. Number two, at 11 years old, my brother Jonathan decided to pop his clogs as well. So yeah, some more grief to add to the dessert, let's say. And then we all went through tests and everything, and it was found that I had a heart condition as well. But to be fair, not the same one as Jonathan had. So, you know, got to take it rough with smooth. I wasn't going to die. Then Jonathan died in the August. And number three, my grandma, my favourite person in the whole wide world, who gave the bestest cuddles ever, who I miss blooming heck every single day I think about my grandma. She died in the November after Jonathan had just died. So I was feeling pretty abandoned. So that was number three. Number four, the year to the day of my brother Jonathan's funeral, my dad decided to announce that he'd had an affair. So he buggered off. So at the age of 11, sorry, that was when I was 12, I was feeling pretty abandoned. My brother had left me, my grandma had left me, and then my dad fucked off too. It were really, really great. And then, oh gosh, it'd have been about 10, 15 years after my dad moved out. He ended up having a heart attack. And so he went into hospital and they did a load of tests, and his heart, basically it was found that he had a genetic condition called right ventricular dysplasia. So yeah, that were a bit shit too. So I went through all the tests, the genetic testing, my blood got sent over to Harvard University, and first ever probably good bit of luck in my life. It came back that I didn't have this condition, so therefore I wasn't going to die and I couldn't pass this condition on to my children. My dad ended up having a defibrillator installed or fitted in his heart. So basically, if it ever happened again with his heart, he would then be instantly resuscitated. It's like the defibrillators that you get on the street in the locked up boxes, but like size of a matchbox. And it used to be just under his chest on his left hand side, where his heart is, funnily enough. And that kicked off a few times, I believe, 2 or 3 times. And every time it did, my dad had to stop driving for a year. So yeah, that was great fun for him. And then, what was the next thing? Oh, then I had Sam, my eldest child. And that was another good bit of luck, I suppose. Well, I thought so at the time. If you met him now, you'd know. I do sometimes wonder, was it good bit of luck or was it bad luck? But no, I love him to pieces. And then in the November after I had Sam, I started with pins and needles in my feet, which slowly started spreading up my legs and eventually got to kind of mid-thigh way. And I went to plenty of doctors and got the most ridiculous amount of antidepressants, because the doctors thought it were post-traumatic, psychosomatic postnatal depression is what they said it was. And so yeah, went through a boatload of them, but you know your own body, and I knew for a fact at that time I was not depressed. So then I got MS. I ended up in hospital, should I say, and they did a CT scan. As it happened, I was due to have a CT scan the day after. I ended up in hospital with the worst headache that I have ever had. Now, I suffer with migraines, so I know how bad a headache can be, but this was beyond bad. I couldn't even move my head to the side, with the most sharp shooting pain going down the left-hand side of my head and making me vomit, and it was just a horrible time. So yeah, I ended up in hospital. My left leg was dragging all over the floor, couldn't move it properly. It was kind of like Hop Along Harry. So I had this CT scan, and they came back and said to me, there's two things. It's either a brain tumour or you've got MS. So at this point, I'm thinking, oh, fuck. My mum lost my youngest brother before I was born, Matthew. He died of 2 brain tumours. So I'm thinking to myself, how the hell am I going to tell my mum that I have a brain tumour as well? My mum is the strongest, most loving woman that you could ever wish to meet. She's amazing, like beyond amazing. The shit that she's had to deal with in her life is just, you just could not write it. So I ended up getting blue lighted over to the LGI and having a CT scan and lots of different tests telling me that they wanted to take biopsies of the scars that they'd found on my brain, which were big lesions. Now, MS usually, I can't remember which way it is. It either presents as lots of little lesions or it presents as big lesions, and whichever way it was. Oh, thank you, Holly. Oh, getting a paw up. Whichever way it is that MS usually presents, mine presents differently. It's the opposite, basically. Which is why they weren't sure if it was a brain tumour or not. And then I was put under Dr. Jameson, a neurologist over at the hospital, and I had another relapse. So not only was my left leg dragging, my left arm started to stop work. Well, it didn't start to stop. It just stopped. I wasn't able to move my fingers. I wasn't able to clench my fist. I wasn't able to do anything with my left arm. So I looked like I'd had a stroke, basically. And so they did lots of different tests, lots of different examinations, and eventually I was put under, as she was called then, Dr. Helen Ford. And she was just amazing. She just made everything so easy and simple, and she just made it so that I was able to live life again, knowing what was wrong with me, knowing that I wasn't depressed, which I already knew. But yeah, she diagnosed me with multiple sclerosis in May of 2008. I then got married in the August 2008 to my ex-husband, and then basically broodiness took over, because we weren't sure with Sam whether we could have any more, because we didn't know what my condition was going to develop into or become. So we decided Sam was it. But then I was pregnant with Sam whilst my best friend from work, Helen, was pregnant with her eldest son. And she came into work. We met for lunch, as we normally do on every other week. And she came into work and said, "You're going to think I'm absolutely bonkers, but I want another child." And it was like she flicked a switch inside my head, and I was like, I really want another child as well. So I went home that night, and I was acting very suspicious because I'd got really excited inside of myself. So my ex-husband obviously knew that there was something wrong, and so he was like, just tell me what's wrong with you, what's wrong, what's up? I just went, I want another child. And he was like, what the fuck? And so yeah, he thought about it and then eventually came round to the idea, because we'd both always said that we wanted a minimum of 2 children, and we obviously only had my eldest at that point. So he finally decided that he were okay with that, and we then had my youngest son, who is just, he looks so angelic, but he's the biggest shit that you could ever not wish to meet, let's say. But I love him so much, an unconditional love that every mother has with the child. So yeah, William came along, and then 6 years later, I decided that I was going to have an affair, which was great. So yeah, I had an affair, which just wasn't really an affair. I hadn't realised at the time, but I'd fallen out of love with my ex-husband. And I, at that point, should have been honest and open and said to him, look, I really don't love you anymore and we need to separate. But instead, I grabbed on to some attention that was going to be that was being shown to me, should I say. And yeah, jumped in at that opportunity, and the ex-husband found out, and that was the end of that. And then 2 years later, it might have been a year later, let's say, I met my now husband, Dave, who is the most amazing man. And he loves me just the way I am. Wheels, bolts, nuts, full shebang. And when I say bolts and nuts, I'm meaning from like my wheelchair or my stair lift. And it's just nice to have somebody that loves you just the way you are and understands things. I'm not saying that my ex-husband didn't get it, but he wasn't as empathetic, let's say. I think that's a word anyway. But yeah, so now I've got my Dave. And in between all that, I was diagnosed from relapse remitting MS, multiple sclerosis, to secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, which means now whatever happens stays. So I'm now currently off work with partial sight in my left eye. And yeah, those are pretty much my life icks. But when I missed one out. When I was just coming up to 2 years old, my dad fell and broke his back. And so he was in a wheelchair pretty much all my life. I do not remember my dad walking at all. And in a way, when people say everything happens for a reason, I've kind of come to the conclusion that my dad had to do that to teach me how to deal with disability in my life, because I have learnt so much from the things that my dad used to do, the way that my dad coped with things, the way that my dad manoeuvred and transferred, and just everything. My childhood was basically one big lesson, and my dad was my biggest inspiration, and I miss him so much, and I never thought I would, but I miss him more than I ever thought was possible. And I need to stop talking about that now, because otherwise I'm just going to end up in floods of tears and you're not going to understand a word that I'm saying. So I'll leave it there, and those are my life icks.